Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long ways from home. 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 Warm greetings, dear ones, and welcome to worship at Unity Church. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, and to align ourselves to integrity, service, and joy. As we reach out from the sanctuary today, we too miss being together in person. Despite the limitations, we hope you will enter in as fully as you can. Light a chalice, speak and sing along. Call out the names of those in need. Let worship have its way with you until we are together in person again. After the service, whether this is your first time with us or you've been here your whole life, you are invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour where we will share a bit of our lives with each other and get to know one another more deeply. Stay for just a few minutes or stay up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. If you would like to learn more about Unity Church and Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to participate in Finding Yourself at Unity today at 1 p.m. This week's 1-hour online class will offer a question and answer session with Unity's ministers. Today, as we look outside here in St. Paul, it is snowing. The world is again covered with a fresh white blanket of snow. And I want to invite you this Wednesday to join us online for something called Art in Bloom in Zoom. Our art committee has selected 7 pieces from our permanent collection, and 7 of our members have been living with those pieces of art for several weeks now, and they are creating floral interpretations of each art piece. You can join us online on Wednesday, March 3rd, to enjoy this combination of floral and painted and sculpted art, and to meet with the artists who created these arrangements. Also, please check out a program we have called Listen with Love. Unity's artist in residence, Marcus Young, is collaborating with our music director, Ahmed Anzaldúa, to create a unique playlist to be incorporated in this year's Arthur Foote Music Sunday in May. We invite you to participate. Even if you don't think of yourself as musical and can't carry a tune, by signing up for Listen with Love in a small group session, you can be a participant in this. You'll get to share a recording of your current favorite song and listen to another Unity friend's favorite song. These small group experiences offer a facilitated way to connect more intimately, deepening familiarity and trust with one another as we strive to embody wonder, open-hearted engagement, and courageous action. Information and details about these and other offerings shared this morning is available on Unity's homepage. Next Sunday, during a service entitled Freedom in Flight, the Reverend Jan Eller Isaacs and worship associate Leah Rivamonte will introduce the March worship theme of suffering as they share the stories of those who have suffered in various prisons of confinement. Once again, welcome to Unity Church. It is a joy to share this hour together.
Good morning. There is no denying that this last year has been incredibly hard for me. The uncertainty of it, the toll it has taken on my children, our family, our relationships, all feels like too much most of the time. When Karen and I spoke about how curiosity plays a role in my spiritual practice, my initial response was that it does not. But for the past few weeks, I've been thinking about it. And I wonder if I reframe the uncertainty and the doubt I have about the future and the anger I have to the things that have failed us during this pandemic as a curiosity about how we will see it through. How will my family become stronger from this experience? Curious about how we can gain what we'll gain and how we will get to the other side. It makes it a little easier. Even though most days it seems like I won't make it through, this practice of curiosity makes it feel like something I can do. Come, let us worship together.
While I run this race, guide my feet. While I run this race, guide my feet. While I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this
Join me in reading the responsive affirmation. None of our private worlds is big enough for us to live a wholesome life in. Wider world. What we are, any of us, but strangers and sojourners, forlornly wandering through the nighttime until we draw together and find the meaning of our lives in one another, dissolving our fears in each other's courage, making music together, and lifting torches to guide us through the dark. We belong together. Join me in a moment of silence.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children. With those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, for those who care for family members in ill health and those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days, and by those who rise above heartbreak to challenge oppression in all its forms. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation as together we live into our longing to embody and help to build the beloved community. Will you pray with me now for these we name? We hold Peter and Nancy Hagee as Peter's brother John faces his final days in hospice. We embrace Susan Schaefer and her family, including daughter Emily and son-in-law Bennett Wallace, as Susan enters hospice, not seeking treatment for a reoccurrence of cancer. We hold Yule and Margaret Crosby, parents of Kathy Crosby Schmidt, who were involved in a very serious car accident this past week in Dallas. Yule remains hospitalized while Margaret recovers at home. We send our healing thoughts and prayers to Jenny Wilson, who is undergoing lumbar spinal fusion surgery this Friday at the U. Jenny is taking a 6-week break from work to heal from her surgery. And we send our best wishes for a speedy recovery to George Feldhammer, who is undergoing hip replacement surgery. We join Twin Cities friends and fans from around the world in celebrating the life and mourning the death of Peter Ostroushko, virtuoso, mandolinist, and fiddler. Whether playing with the Minnesota Orchestra, Bob Dylan, Prairie Home Companions Band, or our own Ruth McKenzie, Peter's music came straight from his soul. His performing days ended 3 years ago when he suffered a stroke, but he continued teaching mandolin. He died of heart failure this past Wednesday at the age of 67, leaving us with 15 recorded albums as a lasting gift from his heart and his talents. Lastly, we acknowledge all the currents of grief that flow around the world as lives are compromised or lost to COVID-19. We are acutely aware of the many ways that communities of color are hit inordinately hard by the pandemic. Every day, both the danger and the grief grow deeper. May each of us light a candle of healing, remembering those whom we have lost and in hope of healing for those who are now ill. May the flames we kindle light our way as we make the road by walking. May we also stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May they and may we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or hold in the silent sanctuary of your heart the names of those you would like to lift today in worship. And let us pray. Holy One, source of all being and promise of all our becoming, we are living through times of so much loss. Sometimes it seems we have lost the very ground beneath our feet. In the upturning of life as we knew it before, help us to remember that we are, none of us, alone. Let us hear the gathered voices of those who have gone before us, offering us their paths and their promises of support and encouragement. Open our senses to notice also the ones who are with us today, that we might discover the collective strength and resilience available when we make our way on this journey together. Widen our curiosity about new possibilities for the future, nested in this troubled time, as we make and keep our own promises to the generations that will follow. When our shoulders feel the weight and worry of living through so much change and challenge, may the strength and shared power of all these companions, past, present, and future, and the strength and shared power of this community lighten our burden, embolden our faith, and steady our steps as we make our way on the road ahead. May it be so, and amen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings
Good morning and a special welcome each Sunday to the children and families who are joining in worship. I know that in-person learning for our youngest students started at the beginning of this month and will include our older youth by the middle of April. And I know for certain families that is so important. For families who depend on schools, for technology, for meals, for parents who can now go to work. And I also know that there are other families who depend on having distance learning as an important and valuable option because members of their household who have higher risk conditions or who may live in school districts that may not yet have all of the resources that the school needs for safety. So many different ways of experiencing and looking at the challenges and the unknowns facing us. That's reminded me of a story this week about looking. As we do, I want to invite the children, come a little closer as you can to your screens at home for this story. The year is 1984, and there is a student and a teacher walking to their favorite coffee shop in Greenwich Village, New York City. The student is the novelist, the writer, Larry Shainberg, and his teacher is the Japanese Buddhist monk, Kyudo Nakagawa Roshi. As they're walking, Larry says, Roshi, do you know the story, the famous story of Nasruddin and the key? And he begins to explain this story. A famous story from the 13th century, a Sufi story from the Eskişehir province of Turkey about a funny and wise teacher by the name of Nasruddin. One evening, a young man was walking past the house of the great teacher Nasruddin. And he saw Nasruddin on his hands and knees on the ground underneath the street lamp looking for something. The young man stops and asks, Teacher, what are you looking for? Oh, I'm looking for the key to the house. I lost the key to my house. Can I help you to look for the key, teacher? And the young man gets down on the ground and begins to help. But teacher, do you remember where you first lost the key to the house? Oh, yes, over there, near the house. Then why, asks the young man, why are you looking for the key underneath this street lamp over here? And Nasruddin answers, why, it's because the light is right here, of course. Larry finishes telling the story and asks Roshi Kyudo, Roshi, I've been thinking about this story because there are so many questions and doubts that I have and so many questions and unknowns, and this story holds my attention. Do you know what this story, what Nasruddin is trying to teach us? But Kyudo Roshi is wearing his Yankees baseball cap and jacket, and he's much more interested in talking about the Yankees and baseball than anything else. But Larry is determined to talk about this story. And he begins to explain to Kyudo Roshi how he thinks that the story is about going to the root of the problem. You lost the key over there near the house, so why would you be looking around underneath the street lamp over here? Yes, human beings have a desire for maybe quick and easy answers, and the light is here, and it's easier searching here than the difficult work of looking around in the darkness. Maybe that's what the story is trying to say, that we need to really think about the root of the problem, even if it means looking around in the dark places. But Larry has been thinking about this story for a long time, and more recently it occurred to him that he might have it all wrong. What if the key moved? I mean, why couldn't someone accidentally have stumbled upon the key near the house, and out of the kindness of their heart, they actually picked it up and moved it and placed it near the street lamp, knowing that it would be evening? Or maybe it wasn't even a person at all. Maybe it was a neighborhood dog, yes, or a curious squirrel who moved it underneath the street lamp. Maybe the story is trying to teach us that just because we think we lost it over there, we shouldn't stay stuck in the past. Maybe it's a lack of imagination, because who knows? It could have moved right here. And we should take advantage of all the light that's being offered to us. What do you think, Roshi? Asks Larry. But Kudo Roshi is more interested in talking about whether later on they should have Japanese noodles or Italian spaghetti. But Larry is focused and he's determined. Roshi, please, what do you think Nasruddin is trying to teach us? What is this story saying about finding the lost key? And that's when Kudo Roshi finally stops walking and turns to face Larry. And he says, Larry-san, what is the story trying to say? Simple. Looking is the key. Larry was startled because he had never thought about it that way. Nasruddin was looking for the key to the house, but maybe the thing that he was really looking to find was a method of looking. What is the best way of looking? When you've lost something really precious and there are so many unknowns, what is the best way of looking? Is it looking here under the street lamp? Is it looking over there where you think you might have first lost something? Is it looking alone by yourself? Or maybe it's looking with other people. When we have lost something so precious, and there are so many changes and so many unknowns, maybe what is most important to find is how we can look. And how we can look, not over here, not just over there, but wherever and everywhere, and look not by ourselves, but maybe to look with as many eyes on the ground so that we can journey to finding our way together. May it be so. Amen.
Friends, your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to one another and to the world. Though the future is unclear, we can't let fear undermine the strength of the ministry we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church can in turn maintain our programs and our staff and keep our promises to the many community partners that our offerings support. Today, the larger portion of our offering will be shared with the Minnesota Indigenous Business Alliance, an organization that works to connect Indigenous tribal economies in an effort to expand their financial impact. Minnesota Indigenous Business Alliance is a critical resource hub for emerging Indigenous entrepreneurs, providing equitable access to tools to start and grow their business. COVID-19, we know, has ravaged Indigenous communities both physically and economically. I hope you will join me in supporting this collection to help rescue severely strapped Indigenous businesses. During the interlude, please visit Unity's homepage or follow the link in the YouTube information section to contribute to the offering. You can also mail a check to Unity or use the Give function in your Shelby Next app. Thank you.
Guide my feet, Lord, while I run this race. Guide my feet, Lord, while I run this race. Guide my feet, Lord, while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race in vain. 'Hold me, Lord, while I run this race you. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
June Jordan's Corner on the Curving Sky. Our earth is round, and among other things, that means that you and I can hold completely different points of view and both be right. The difference of our positions will show stars in your windows I cannot even imagine. Your sky may burn with light while mine at that same moment spreads beautiful into darkness. Still, we must choose how to separately corner the circling universe of our experiences. Once chosen, our cornering will determine the messages of any star and darkness we encounter.
Be a Circle by Mark Nepo. I wish you the ability to breathe after pain, to begin again, though nothing else seems possible.
I wish you resilience, to part like the ocean and accept like the sky.
I wish you survival, to take in life like a trapped miner, finding an air hole and praising it like God.
I wish you courage, to ask of everything you meet, what bridge are we?
I wish that the kindness that you are can brighten your way, like orange leaves falling about the face of a doe.
I wish you endless journey that seldom appears as we imagine.
I wish you curiosity, to make a boat of wonder and an oar of gratitude. Unlike today in St. Paul, Minnesota, I am going back to a sunny, blue sky summer's day. David and I were visiting my sister's family on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, where she'd rented a house for summertime play. And on that particular day, she and I had decided to take the 2 small kayaks that came with the house out on the water. We went into a bay that appeared more navigable, perhaps, than the wider Great Lake to which it belonged. We lathered on sunscreen, donned our life preservers, sunglasses, and set out on 2 personal kayaks that were, in retrospect, not much more than large human-sized bath toys. It was glorious. We paddled and floated and talked and laughed. I still remember, in the way that a moment can sometimes have a photographic quality, recording the beautiful sight of my sister's face, smiling and radiant against the true blue sky with a vast expanse of water all around her. We were having such a good time. We had stopped thinking about where we were and where we were going and where we had come from. The day was as open as the lake around us. Then, in one quick instant, everything changed. My sister leaned too far over and her kayak capsized. Despite every effort she made, she could not pull herself back into the kayak. Only then did we notice how far from shore we had gone. Only then did she notice her life vest didn't fit properly and was so loose it barely kept her head above water. Only then did we both realize the danger we were in. I will tell you now, all these years later, that we both made it back safely to land. But I will also tell you that simply recalling that day now charges my whole body with alarm. The arduous and fearful journey back to shore, she in the water holding onto the back of my kayak with all her strength, and me paddling with everything I had to tow her and her empty kayak across the wide bay toward a shore that didn't seem to get any closer as we went. I remember, too, how our families, without any means of rescue, eventually lined up on the shore with their own fears mounting, straining to see my sister in the water behind me as I paddled toward them with her empty kayak in tow. We don't tell this story often in our family. I tell it now, and with my sister's permission, as an example of how quickly life can capsize. How one minute it shines with exuberant bliss and beauty, and the next, still under the same blue sky and sun, it upends all assumptions, causing a trembling to the core. This possibility of sweeping, dramatic change will likely not come as news to any one of you. For who among us has not at some point had life turned upside down, whether suddenly or slowly, by accident or illness, by choice or by chance, or even in the way life can be flipped over by love or long pursued and desirable opportunities that become real. Life is made of change. And because of that, it is also necessarily made of moments in which what we had assumed to be true will be overturned, requiring that we work for all we're worth to stay afloat, taking in the new realities around us while keeping our eyes on the shore. Today, as we have annually here at Unity for many years now, this worship service will acknowledge and bless another group of thresholders, members and friends of this community who are living on significant personal thresholds, or in other words, in the midst of life's big upending changes. These 15 people, who will be named in the blessing following this sermon, have come together to encourage and learn from one another as each one makes their way toward their own shore. Some of their thresholds were chosen, many were not. The particulars of their life changes are unique, and each person must determine how best to cross their threshold and where to find the wisdom, the courage, and the guidance they will need. But all of these thresholders have chosen to entrust one another with their stories, and with the tears and laughter, the vulnerability and courage, and a whole lot of not knowing woven throughout those stories. They know too well that crossing thresholds is daunting and difficult. It can be frightening, overwhelming, confusing, exhausting. There are losses and grief, as well as gifts and excitement. Always there will be portions of the journey that can only be made alone. But always there will also be companions whose presence and witness, whose compassion and wisdom will mean that even the solitary path need not be lonely and need not bring despair. These are characteristics of life on the threshold, which in addition to all of that is sacred. alive with new possibilities and a chance to practice curiosity in exploring them. I want to suggest today that all of us within this congregation and well beyond are living in threshold times. If this was not abundantly clear when the pandemic broke out a year ago, and through the uprisings and insurrections near and far since then, it has become a fact we have each lived with and into, wrestling often daily with persistent change and the loss of much that we assumed we knew, even just a year ago. In the last month, I've been learning about something called assumptive loss. Common to many of our pandemic experiences, but often unnamed, even as we experience grief over its impact. Understanding assumptive loss begins by naming the world of our experience, or what we sometimes call normal life, which of course is relative to each person regarding it as normal. This is what Colin Murray Parkes named the assumptive world. In other words, everything we know and think we know about ourselves, others, and the larger world and the way we understand it. It includes our expectations of the future, our prejudices about the present, and our interpretations of the past. Living through significant change often involves the loss of our assumptive world. Not only what we expected of our circumstances and of others, but also what we expected of ourselves. For instance, some people who are introverts have told me they thought they would be happy staying at home alone this year, but discovered instead a loneliness or frustration or despair they did not understand. Or some people I have known to be deeply patient have become downright competitive and demanding when it comes to getting their vaccines today. Or as a retired friend who had been enjoying a slower pace in pre-pandemic times recently told me, she's now so bored and lazy, she said, I can't even recognize myself. Assumptive loss opens up questions we might not even know we are asking, creating a groundlessness not only in our circumstances, but also in our identity, in our very sense of purpose. No wonder it can be so overwhelming and fraught with grief and with the anxiety of not knowing. Think back with me to the beginning of the pandemic and some of the questions we were asking just a year ago in March. Should we close the church building? Initially, unthinkable. Then, having decided it would be wise and necessary to do just that, the question arose, for how long? We started by saying it would be 3 weeks, at which point we would revisit the question. Soon after came the question, how will we do church and be with one another while the building is closed? I recently ran across several pages of notes I took last March from a phone conversation with a stressed-out, overworked sales rep who had finally returned my calls and described to me how something called Zoom could be used for congregational life. In many of the meetings and conversations of that time, I remember often not even knowing what questions to ask. Instead, we were asked to live into the larger question beneath and beyond our unknowns, which was the question of how and what and who we would be with one another. Or to borrow from Mark Nepo's words, how to muster the courage to ask of everything you meet, what bridge are we? What bridge are we? Now, there's a question that is still salient a year after COVID so dramatically upturned our lives. Or in other words, what bridge are we building together, connecting what we've left behind to that distant shore where we are going? Assumptive loss, of course, comes in different shapes and sizes, just as our experiences of the pandemic do, and as all lived experience does. For some of us, the pandemic has meant a loss of work, or health, or home, or support systems. For others, it has meant more work. As healthcare workers, teachers, parents, caregivers, frontline workers, first responders, all work many long hours. Your experience of the pandemic will not be the same as mine. So we are all invited to be curious. First about ourselves, as Kara noted in her call to worship, not making assumptions about the meaning and impact of our experiences. And also being curious about each other. To ask of ourselves and one another, how is it for you today? And to take time to listen to the answer. What do you need? And how might we get through this together? June Jordan noted, our earth is round. And among other things, that means that the difference of our positions will show stars in your window I cannot even imagine. Your sky may burn with light, while mine at the same moment spreads beautiful to darkness. A friend that I met long after her children were grown once told me of her early years as a stay-at-home parent, having newly moved to Alaska. She described how her isolation as a parent had been compounded by the long nights of the Alaskan winter, slowly claiming more and more of the sunlight each day. The lengthening darkness, she said, was nearly unbearable, and finally, when the days became so short, she would watch the clock carefully all day long to make sure that she was standing at her kitchen window for the one brief slice of time each day when the sun could be seen there, rising and setting within a single, all too brief viewing. I picture her waiting at that window each day for the one brief, fleeting glimpse of the sun that would carry her through the next 23 hours. I imagine, though I never asked this of my friend, that other places and homes in Alaska might have had a slightly better, or maybe even a slightly longer view of the sunlight on those darkened winter days. I imagine, too, what a relief it might have been for my friend had someone invited her to share their view, whether it was longer or not. This, my friends, is what the Thresholds group has been doing in these past months as they've met with one another, sharing their particular views of the light, of the shore, of the night sky, of the near and far sides of the threshold times they are each living through. And this is what congregational life, at its best, also does. It brings us together in the joys and the beauty and the losses and the sorrows that life brings our way, individually and together. It beckons us to stay with each other, especially when life capsizes us and our assumptions are swept away. It invites us to share our strength, our hopes, our grief, our frustrations, our dreams, and our power as we paddle toward the far shore. And just as the Thresholds group is nested in the larger strength and support of this congregation, this community of faith is held in the larger strength and support of our faith tradition. across geography, and across time. We are held in and buoyed by a wide web and a long lineage of resilience, faithful practice, fierce resistance, and great wisdom. As we rise to the challenges of this time, and they are many, we are accompanied not only by one another here and now, but also by those who have gone before us, rising to their own challenges. So when we meet for worship online, as we are today, we are calling up and drawing upon a long collective memory, almost 150 years old, of sitting and standing, of marching and singing and praying side by side as Unity Church. We are also creating a through line from all of those ancestors in faith to the generations to come, those not yet born, who will look back on this year with gratitude for all of you who are reaching out to one another in new and old ways, sharing both the confusion and the possibilities of this upturned and wave-tossed world we are in today, to discover and strengthen the bonds we will pass on to future generations to come. One of the great lies of dominant white culture and of oppressive systems in general is the insistence that we are each first and foremost alone, both the oppressed and the oppressors, not connected to one another in either our suffering or our strength. That one person's well-being is and can remain separate from that of others. The difference itself is a critical division that separates us. That any of us, fearful of the violence spreading through our cities today, can be safe by closing and locking our doors without tending to the underlying needs of our neighbors for food, for shelter, for work, for human dignity and compassion, the great needs that are at the root of so much violence. This lie and illusion of separateness, my friends, is one assumption we will do well to lose in these threshold times. If we learn nothing else from the multiple pandemics we are in today, of COVID, of environmental devastation, of systemic racism and growing violence, may we learn that we are all deeply connected. We must choose, wrote June Jordan, how we separately corner the circling universe of our experience. Once chosen, our cornering will determine the message of any star and darkness we encounter. As we live in these threshold times, with all the assumptive loss they bring, we each have the chance to corner the circling universe with messages and larger questions that will guide us through this time of great unknowns. We each have the chance to let go of questions like how long or how far, and instead to follow the longer arc of a greater curiosity and quest, redefining who we are and how we will be with each other. We each have the chance to share our views of this round earth and the circling universe around it as we paddle together toward a distant shore we call beloved community. Learning as we go that we are not alone, that we can only reach that shore by joining hand and heart together. Will you now join me in this larger, longer quest as we make our way through these days together? It is time to bless the thresholders. And as I read the names of this year's Thresholds group, and their pictures appear on your screen, please hold them in your heart and your thoughts. You will likely not know the particulars of their threshold, and you won't need to in order to participate in blessing them today and standing by them through this passage of their lives. This year's thresholders are Alan Beal, Dinah Dale, Louisa Daltilia, Pat Diamond, Desiree Kempke, Kelly Larson, Jim Mulvey, Kathy Peterson, Beth Peterson, Kurt Shaper, Kathy Simmelink, Lori Sovel, Ruth Stryker Gordon, Paige Tiggy, Sally Velzen, in earlier years, the thresholders gathered in the front of the sanctuary here as we named them. This year, I want to suggest that each of us is so deeply and uniquely engaged in the threshold times we share that we might all benefit from the power and promise of this blessing. So I invite all of you listening today to open your heart in a posture of receiving. If it feels right, you might want to put your hands on your heart as you listen. Close your eyes if you're comfortable with that, or gaze at your screen to read the words as they are spoken to you. And receive these words of blessing that were recorded 2 years ago and now are spoken to you across time by this congregation, gathered in the mystery and the power, all of us then blessing each of us now, promising to stand by one another in all that is to come. For all those standing on a threshold, about to step into the unknown, we are standing with you. Although we may not know the particulars of this threshold, which is uniquely yours, we offer you our hands of steadiness on your path, our compassionate ears to hear your hopes and fears, and our open hearts to share the joys and sorrows of your passage, spoken and unspoken. As you step toward the uncertainty of all that is unfolding, we remind you of the love that holds you certain and true. May your own inner light guide you, and may you learn to trust that light even when it does not shine very far down the road. If your light begins to flicker and fade, we will offer sparks to reignite it. May your heart remain open to grieve what you are leaving, and to receive the gifts that will come your way in this crossing. May you be blessed by courage to keep stepping into the light that awaits you. May you be blessed by compassion, especially for yourself. May this passage bring you new discoveries and renewed faith and offer you a gateway to ancient wisdom and healing wholeness. May you always remember the pledge of this community, extending hand and heart open to you in all that is to come. Our closing hymn is Life Calls Us On. And just as we heard the blessing spoken to us from the congregation several years ago, we will now hear this hymn sung to us by the congregation, gathered in this sanctuary several years ago, and singing now to us and with us as we sing along, if you like, and receive this gathering of voices guiding us and calling us on today with faith, with love, with hope. The hymn is Life Calls Us On. Friends, we have, each and all of us, experienced our lives being overturned in the last year. May we not let the lie of separation drag any of us down. May we each have the courage to ask of everything and everyone we meet, what bridge are we? And how will we come through this together? May it be so, and amen.